Welcome to Bill's Aviation Podcast, where your stories are our stories. I'm a general aviation pilot, aviation writer, airplane builder, avionics developer, test pilot, and general screw-up. All stories feature Joe and his merry band of miscreants. The purpose of these stories is to educate and entertain pilots. If you have a story you'd like to share anonymously, please contact me. Today's story is called Snagged at Chock. On a beautiful fall day, Joe decided to take his wife Karen for a mid-morning ride in his old Tailorcraft. While waiting to get hangar space, the little T-craft was tied up outside. The beautiful old airplane was protected in cloth coverings, tied down at each wing and at the Scott tailwheel, with wheel chocks keeping the mains from moving. As part of the pre-flight routine, the coverings were removed, wing and tail untied, and wheel chocks pulled aside before the true pre-flight could begin. Once completed, Joe set the T-craft's parking brake, primed the engine, verified the ignitions were off, pulled the prop through a few times, turned on the left ignition, and from behind the prop gave it a quick flip, which got the romping, stomping 65-horse Continental engine ticking over slowly. Climbing in the right door, buckling the period lap belt, waving at Karen to climb in and buckle up while holding the heel brakes, verifying the oil pressure, turning on the right ignition, and increasing the engine speed until the backwards reading tachometer read 1,000 RPMs. Once the oil temperature needle moved off the peg, it was time to taxi. Easing off the questionably effective heel brakes, increasing the power, and pressing on the right rudder pedals, the pre-war T-craft pulled out of the parking spot and slowly duck-walked to the end of the runway. Run-up complete, trim set, the T-craft lumbered down the runway and lifted off into the clear blue skies. After climbing to altitude, only 1,000 feet AGL, but it was still a climb, which in the T-craft can take a bit of time. Then Joe felt it for the first time, something bumping the rudder pedals. Nothing to worry about, no big deal. Then it happened again, another bump on the rudder pedals. Joe looked over at Karen and asked if she had kicked the rudder pedals, to which she confirmed she had not touched them. Joe thought it odd, but every now and then he could feel the bump on the rudder pedals, and that was something he had never experienced before. Oh well, keep flying the aircraft. Joe and Karen landed at the county airport not too far away and taxied out for another departure. With no radio in the No Electrics T-craft, there was no chatter to bother them. As they passed by the FBO, a guy came running out towards them, waving his arms and pointing to the tail. Joe stopped the plane, and the line guy walked up to the window to tell Joe he had some wheel chocks wrapped around the tailwheel. Well, that explains it, Joe said to himself. Shutting down the engine, Joe climbed out, and sure enough, the wheel chocks, which were held together with a small piece of rope, must have been snagged by the Scott 2000 tailwheel when he taxied out of his parking spot and swung the tail around. They were bouncing around in the airstream, but never contacted the airframe, elevator, or rudder during the short flight with them caught in the tailwheel. They were quickly removed from the tailwheel and tossed in the T-craft's voluminous baggage compartment. The flight back home was uneventful, except for Karen giving poor Joe a hard time the entire flight. Lesson learned: when pulling wheel chocks away from your wheels, move them well clear of your wheels. Don't give them just enough room for the airplane to roll forward, especially if the wheel chocks are tied together and your plane has a Scott 2000 tailhook or tailwheel. Thank you for listening. If you enjoyed what you heard, please hit the like button or thumbs up and subscribe by clicking on the logo in the lower right of your screen. If you really like what you've heard, please help support this channel and become a Patreon. Part of each donation will go to aviation safety and aviation youth programs. Be sure to check out next week's story about Joe finding a unique way to increase his fuel consumption.